Some mechanisms cannot be persuaded back to life.
Yes, Master.
Come. The Force has something else to show you.
Show me what, Master? You sensed something, didn't you?
The Force leaves impressions, even when history forgets.
Is it Sith?
No, older.
The stone felt unfamiliar.
Because it is not part of our Order's memory.
Then who built it?
A civilization the Republic prefers to call myth.
What is it?
A reminder that the Jedi were not the first to listen.
Tell me more, Master.
More than 30,000 years ago,
the Rakata ruled vast regions of the galaxy. Their fleets crossed systems without resistance. Entire civilizations were folded into their dominion. For a time, it seemed nothing could challenge them. Conquest carries its own burden. Worlds stripped for tribute cannot sustain an empire forever. Expansion slows. Supply lines stretch thin. Even the most powerful civilization must confront its limits. And the Rakata did not accept limits. Instead of retreating, they changed direction. Their scholars replaced their generals. Their attention turned inward. Delegations arrived from subordinate worlds bearing reduced offerings. Mineral shipments below quota. Labor contingents diminished by collapse. Agricultural exports contaminated by environmental decay. Entire worlds began to fall below viable thresholds. The Rakata did not withdraw from these planets. They intensified operations. Additional labor was imported. Infrastructure was expanded. Extraction quotas were raised in an effort to compensate for diminishing returns. The Empire had been built on momentum. Slowing down was not considered a solution. The solution demanded labor on an unprecedented scale. Assigned to agricultural matrices, mining complexes, and orbital construction grids. Entire species were cataloged according to utility. Efficiency replaced brutality as the organizing principle. During this reorganization, another realization emerged. Among the countless populations under Rakatan control were individuals sensitive to the Force. Now they were identified systematically. Examination chambers were constructed, protocols established. The Force was no longer regarded as a mystical advantage. It was evaluated as a measurable asset. At the heart of the Empire, a decisive shift occurred. The war halls that had once planned invasions were converted into strategic chambers. Generals found their authority diminished. In their place rose the scholar caste, analysts, architects, theoreticians. Under their direction, the Empire ceased to think in terms of campaigns. It began to think in terms of systems. The Infinite Empire was no longer driven by momentum. It was preparing for something deliberate, and from that deliberation, a new design would emerge. In the deep core, beyond the reach of most Imperial fleets, the Rakata encountered the Qua structures, vast chambers cut with precision beyond contemporary Rakatan methods. Internal corridors aligned to gravitational vectors with mathematical intent. There were no inscriptions of conquest, no symbols of dominion, only design. The scholar caste initiated full structural surveys. Whoever had built these constructs had solved problems the Rakata were only beginning to articulate. On Leon, within the intercontinental complex, a chamber was constructed to coordinate the totality of Imperial resources. It was not a war room. It was an accounting center for the galaxy itself. Stellar output, planetary yield, labor distribution, fleet deployment, all were mapped within a single architectural system. They began to search for a solution that did not depend on planets, or populations, or the patience of the conquered. What they conceived would alter the balance of the galaxy for millennia. They would draw power not from worlds, but from a star. And from that decision, everything that followed became inevitable. The Star Forge. Not every stellar body was suitable for feeding. Unstable stars would collapse under forced extraction. Younger stars fluctuated beyond tolerable thresholds. Older stars lacked the sustained output required for continuous production. Deep core survey expeditions identified candidate systems whose stellar output could be calculated centuries in advance. When a star met every requirement, mass, rotation, stability, yield, it was marked for utilization. Only then the feeding began. Extraction arrays extended along the lower structures, channeling stellar plasma through calibrated conduits designed to withstand temperatures no planetary forge could survive. Within the forge, that energy was converted, stabilized, and distributed into fabrication matrices of unprecedented scale. Ship hulls were formed without planetary foundries. Weapon systems were assembled without supply chains. Entire fleets emerged without reliance on conquered worlds. The Empire had removed its greatest vulnerability. It no longer depended on tribute. It depended on a star, and a star could burn for millions of years. From that moment forward, expansion was no longer limited by distance or depletion. The Infinite Empire had become self-sustaining. Force-sensitive captives were no longer used only as navigators or enforcers. They were integrated directly into energy regulation systems. Within secured chambers, restrained subjects were connected to amplification matrices that translated their force output into usable power. As the Empire's production capacity expanded, so too did its experimentation. Among the Rakata themselves, certain bloodlines were deemed unsuitable for strategic or administrative roles. Others were deliberately altered through exposure to unstable force manipulation and controlled genetic degradation. The result was a subspecies, physically resilient, mentally diminished, and conditioned for obedience. They became known as Flesh Raiders. Those who demonstrated discipline, endurance, and measurable control were separated from the general registry. They were retrained. Emotional restraint was stripped away. Personal identity was diminished. Loyalty was reinforced through isolation and reward conditioning. These individuals became known as Force Hounds. Their role was singular: to locate, track, and neutralize force-sensitive resistance before it could organize. Populations were divided according to function. Entire civilizations were reduced to statistical categories within Imperial registries. Movement between strata was rare. Reassignment was determined by yield. The program was not chaotic, it was methodical. Among the many subjugated species were the Ongree, a people whose cognitive structure favored abstract mathematics and spatial reasoning. Rather than eliminate them, the Rakata redirected their talents. Ongree scholars were assigned to analyze recovered artifacts of Gree origin. These relics did not resemble Rakatan design, yet their internal logic suggested a level of structural efficiency beyond conventional engineering. Under supervision, the Ongree cataloged ratios, stress tolerances, and dimensional symmetries embedded within the artifacts. Within secured facilities, experimental programs were authorized under what later records would describe as the Architects of Fear. Biological manipulation, force amplification, and environmental conditioning were combined to produce entities designed for intimidation as much as combat. During this period of expansion, Rakatan survey fleets encountered structures of unmistakably artificial origin. Vast circular constructs suspended in deep space. The Hypergates were inactive, but not destroyed. Power signatures, though dormant, suggested a network once capable of linking distant regions through instantaneous transit. Though the Empire did not fully replicate their function, exposure to Qua engineering refined Rakatan understanding of gravitational manipulation and long-range alignment.
You speak of them as if they were unstoppable. If their power was that absolute, what ended them?
Nothing ends power all at once, Obi-Wan. It fractures, it overreaches, and eventually it meets something it did not expect.
Another empire?
Not an empire. A world that refused to kneel.
The Sith?
A king named Adas. And a war the Rakata believed would be routine. It was not. On Korriban, the Sith were not yet an empire.
They were divided into rival clans, bound by bloodlines and constant struggle. Leadership was temporary. Power was contested. Unity was rare. That changed with Adas. Unlike other warlords, he did not seek dominance over a single territory. He sought consolidation. Through strength, strategy, and calculated alliances, he subdued opposing clans and absorbed their warriors into a single command. For the first time in recorded Sith history, Korriban stood united under one sovereign. When Rakatan envoys arrived demanding submission, they did not face scattered tribes. They faced a king. conflict was brutal and sustained. For the first time in their expansion, Rakatan forces were forced into organized withdrawal. The invasion failed. Victory did not come without cost. Adas was grievously wounded during the final engagements. His armor shattered, his body weakened, but his command never faltered until the Rakatan fleet broke formation and retreated from Sith space. From the wreckage of a fallen Rakatan vessel, Adas claimed a device unlike any Sith artifact, a holocron containing fragments of Rakatan knowledge. He did not live to master it. Within a year of the victory, his wounds claimed him. Korriban remained free, but the unity he forged did not survive him.
Empires do not abandon ambition because of a single failure. They adapt.
What did they do?
They reorganized, reinforced their fleets, redirected their attention to another world on the edge of their territory.
Which world?
Tatooine.
Did it fall?
That is a story for another time.